Hello, everyone. My name is Naomi Gillia. I am the Senior Field Marketing Manager at Reveleer, and I'll be your host for today's session. Welcome and thank you for attending our webinar. I will now turn it over to our moderator for today's session, Sarah Fink, to introduce herself as well as our panelists. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Naomi. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Optimizing the Risk Continuum with AI and Clinical Collaboration. My name is Sarah Fink, and I lead the product marketing function here at Reveleer, and I will be your moderator for today's session. So we're thrilled to have you join us as we explore how advancements in risk adjustment technology are transforming value-based care, and as part of the launch of our next generation risk adjustment technology. Before we dive in, here's a couple other items just to make sure that you're aware, just sort of reiterating some of what Naomi shared. We'll run this webinar for about 45 minutes, and we encourage you to participate by submitting your questions in the Q&A. We definitely want to make sure that we're aligning with you and you get as much as you can out of this session. There will also be a quick poll during the session, so stay tuned for that, and I hope you participate. So let's go ahead and get started. Naomi, I can't see the slides, but I want to make sure that you're sharing. Let's go ahead and we'll dive in. Hopefully you guys can see the slides. If not, I'll just cover it by my voiceover. So at Reveleer, our mission is clear and focused. We want to be the technology enablement platform for value-based care organizations. And this is really all about improving the quality of care and patient outcomes through intelligent automation. This mission drives really everything that we do. As healthcare continues its shift toward value-based care models, we're committed to empowering payers and providers with innovative solutions that simplify complex workflows, enhance collaboration, and deliver really relevant clinical insights. By leveraging AI-powered technology, we help organizations achieve their goals while maintaining compliance with the evolving industry standards. So just at a glance, a little bit more about Reveleer, and then we'll dive into our content for today. So our platform consolidates all patient and provider data into a single unified system. This eliminates the need for multiple vendors, improves functional integration, and powers solution for both risk adjustment and quality improvement programs. As we approach 2030, when all Medicare beneficiaries will be treated under value-based care models, we'll set out to build our technology to be flexible so that we can stay current with CMS regulations. With over 15 years of experience, our platform is designed to address the practical challenges faced by health plans and providers on the front lines of value-based care. And we're proud to support over 70 organizations with more than 66 million covered lives on our platform. Our 97% customer retention rate also reflects the trust our customers place in us to deliver those results. Reveleer is really one of the few solutions on the market that supports both risk adjustment and quality improvement on a single platform. And this unified approach ensures that our customers take advantage of the scale of their clinical data management and optimize their coding workflows all in one solution. So thanks for taking the time to learn more about Reveleer. And now let's jump into the key objectives for today's conversation. So the first one really is to highlight the importance of clinical collaboration in achieving success across the risk continuum. Next, we'll be working on sharing some best practices with you for overcoming those challenges in risk adjustment and improving coding accuracy. And then finally, we'll explore future trends in value-based care and how end-to-end risk optimization can play a pivotal role. We've assembled an incredible panel of experts to share their insights and experiences with you today. So let's go ahead and meet them. Please meet James Lewis III. James is a strategic advisor to health plans for risk adjustment, bringing a wealth of expertise and a proven track record of success in healthcare. With a strong focus on performance and innovation, James excels in long-term strategic planning, clinical quality improvement, vendor portfolio management, STAR program management, and risk adjustment. He's a recognized leader in revenue generation and cost containment with an exceptional ability to drive market share, growth, and strategic partnerships between hospital systems, health plans, and provider networks. Thanks for joining us today, James. We're really grateful to have you here. Please also meet Rita Young, and I think she'll be joining us here soon. Rita is the Senior Vice President of Clinical Innovation at Reveleer. She has over 25 years of experience managing corporate operations across the US and international divisions, and is a hands-on problem solver who excels in fostering collaboration between payers and providers. And then finally meet Nadim Hrsrafovic. He's the Vice President of Product Strategy at Reveleer. Nadim is a serial disruptor with deep expertise in human-centered design, advanced analytics, and healthcare innovation. His work here at Reveleer focuses on bridging risk adjustment, quality, and value-based care for both payers and providers. Thank you all for being here today. So what you'll learn. Before we dive in, let's take a moment to highlight what you'll learn. And this hopefully will drive some of the questions that you'll be dropping in the Q&A here shortly. So the first off is the importance of clinical collaboration. We'll explore how fostering collaboration between payers and providers drives success across the risk continuum. Clinical engagement is a critical factor in improving coding accuracy and achieving better operational and clinical outcomes. We'll also cover those best practices for overcoming common challenges, and then finally, future trends in value-based care. So thanks again for taking the time. I want to really take a moment and jump into our poll. Is this the right time, Naomi?
Yes,
so hopefully you guys are
is.
seeing the poll now.
Yes, I am going to go
Wonderful.
ahead and start the poll. One moment, please.
Okay.
And before you get started, Sarah, I just want to make sure that I've moved some of I've had a chance to move my talents to CareFirst. So I just want to make sure that that we're mentioning CareFirst and their risk adjustment team.
Absolutely.
Awesome leadership.
Yeah, thanks, James. That's a great call out.
And we are now showcasing the poll. And the question is, what are your top 3 biggest challenges in implementing risk adjustment in your organization? And you're more than welcome to select up to 3. Is it meeting submission deadlines? Is it data management and retrieval? Is it program performance analytics? And or is it risk profile accuracy? And we'll allow folks a few more seconds to respond, and we will share the results. All right, it's looking great. And just another 10 seconds, and we will showcase sharing the results now. Are you seeing them on your side, Sarah?
I sure am. Yeah. And I think none of us are probably surprised by these results, right? So data management and retrieval and program performance analytics are about neck and neck right now at as some of the top challenges. And then we get into the risk profile accuracy and meeting deadlines. So I think it's pretty clear that all of these are challenges that folks on the call are facing, and I really appreciate you all taking the time to do that. I think we'll be hitting on a bunch of those themes today, and let's go ahead and jump right in. So James, I'd love to start with you, and perhaps you can draw from some of your recent experiences working at CareFirst, but I know you've got a deep well of expertise, across the industry that hopefully you can kind of pull forward some examples in as well. But I'd love to hear from you to share some of your biggest challenges you face when implementing risk adjustment programs, and how did you overcome them?
Well, I think that, so thank you very much. I think the data is always the biggest challenge. It's really getting the targeting logic. So are we going after the right people? Many of the places that I've worked, we're always understating their retrospective. If you're on a DSNP, you probably should be going after 2 to 2.5 charts a member. If you're, an egg whip line of business, and maybe 1 chart a member. But just really understanding, who are you targeting? Why are you targeting them? And are you able to get a prospective gap close, or do you need to target for the retrospective? That generally takes, and I've worked with Nadim in past lives, that generally takes time to really truly understand and outline. It's a multi-year process. I think that there's not always the continuity that's necessary to be successful in those lines of business, because we're so used to pivoting. If we don't get the result that we want immediately, we pivot to another vendor, we pivot to another team. But that data management and truly understanding who you're targeting is the foundation for success in risk adjustment. So I would implore everybody watching and listening to take that 18-month amount of time and really build foundational relationships with your vendor partners. One of the things, Sarah, that I've been able to do to be successful is, once managing the true targeting logic and understanding what members we're going after and why, then you're able to take that data and filter it down to your provider, whether it's transformation office, they're called different everywhere. But once you're able to truly link and understand who you're targeting, then you go to the provider groups and you start to build that as a part of the value-based care continuum. So some programs are more leveraged in risk arrangement, some are, less risk arrangement. But if you truly know who you're going after and what the value is, you're able to start those conversations with value-based care.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, James. Nadeem, are these themes that you're starting to see also, especially with customers who are trying to solve their challenges using our technology here at Reveleer?
Absolutely. And James is spot on. I mean, speaking from a seasoned professional, timing is so critical, and having these strong relationships with your vendors and customers goes such a long way, because in order to be effective, you have to time things much more accordingly. To capture gaps prospectively goes such a long way, because it enables you to anticipate where you'll be next, how to properly bid, how to anticipate challenges down the road, and then how to plan for retrospectively catch them if something falls through gaps. But one of the things that James mentioned that is really, really important is that foundation that needs to be there, and the ability to trust your data and to build that partnership to say, yes, we understand what your weaknesses are, what your strengths, but to be able to trust the information that you have to make better decisions. And so spot on. I mean, James really highlighted it, because he's seen it across many, I would say, many areas.
And Sarah, to just piggyback, everyone is on a different place on the spectrum. So if you're at a health plan that has 20,000 members and you're building up your processes, you're going to need to take additional time to make sure that you're collaborating. If you're at a plan and you have 500,000 members, then the P&L desires are going to be very overwhelming. But I think you just need to have a true assessment of where you are on the spectrum, where you are with your value-based care. Is it all fee for service, or do you have some, risk arrangements? Are you looking to get on a capitated model? And you have to do that assessment of where you are on an annual basis with your leadership, and then make sure that you're providing that insight to your C-suite so they have an understanding, like Nadeem said, really where are the current structure for bids, and then where's that structure going? But when you have your bid structure, you should be able to roll that down. And kind of very similar, we were talking like the HEDIS roadmap. You should have a roadmap to how you're imparting your risk adjustment policies to make sure that you're hitting those revenue targets.
And beyond that, being able to closely collaborate, inform, and engage with your providers, to be able to have that open conversation to say, hey, by the way, this is where we can improve. This is what we can do better. This is why this is important. Because at the end of the day, providers really are passionate about treating patients. And so having them understand why things matter, such as HEDIS, such as risk adjustment, goes a long way.
I love that. Thanks for bringing that provider piece back in. I think that they really need to be a huge part of the conversation, and connecting those dots just beyond the financial impact into the care impact, I think is really the perspective that we're advocating for. Nadeem, I'd love to share, to ask you a question. And I'm kind of shifting things around a little bit, but I'd love to understand how, here at Reveleer, how do we make sure that our solutions and our technology stays adaptable, right? There's so much change on the horizon, and we'll talk a little bit more about what change is coming and you know, each of yours perspective on what that might be. But what is it that we do here at Reveleer from a technology perspective that ensures that we stay adaptable and flexible for our customers?
Great question. So one of the things that we're really proud of here at Reveleer is that when we built this technology, we made sure that the foundation is solid. And once the foundation is solid and we have a very strong comfort level in the accuracy and completeness of our data, we're then able to scale as new needs come across. One of those is being able to listen to our customers. We take a lot of pride in just understanding customer needs, understanding where they're going, what their challenges they have, because to James's point, everybody's pretty much in a different place. And be that by size, be that by region, be that by just maturity within the space. So we try to be multifaceted. We take a lot of pride in that foundation, those foundational pillars that enable us to look beyond just even customers, but also what are the latest needs within the government mandates? How do we anticipate the latest RADV rules? How do we think about what is coming next? How do we make sure that our AI is very solid and structured and can be trusted? So a lot of those things, what are we doing right now? And how do we anticipate the next step in the evolution?
Thank you. That next step is something I'd love to touch on. But before we do that, I just want to, Rita's finally been able to join us. Thank you so much, Rita. We're so glad to have you here. You guys may have heard me introduce her earlier. There was a couple of technical issues, but we got her onto this panel, and she's such an important voice in this conversation. So Rita, I'd love to pull you into the conversation, and I'll just do a check to make sure you can hear me okay.
I can hear you just fine.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us. So Rita, this question is for you. I mean, you've really been at the forefront of building and enabling Reveleer's risk adjustment technology over many, many years. And I'd love to hear your perspective on some of the best practices for integrating clinical insights into risk adjustment to improve coding accuracy. You work really closely with our clinical coders. So what are some of the best practices that you've seen that really work that some folks in our audience today might be able to take advantage of?
Absolutely. One of the first things is going to sound so simple, but it's so imperative, and that is the collaboration across your clinical and your coding teams. What I've experienced is effective communication between the two clinicians is essential for ensuring that we're coding appropriately for risk adjustment. Risk adjustment is just not a me-too thing, right? Risk adjustment differs between commercial, between Medicare, between Medicaid. The other thing that I've discovered is that we have to continuously educate our coding staff. A lot of the coders, including myself, once you get your coding certification, you're like, yay, I've done it. But the coding world is forever changing. Disease processes are forever evolving. I mean, COVID-19 is a great example of how we had to go back and re-educate our coders on what to look for in regards to meet tamper, signs and symptoms, and all of those good things. So that's one of the very first things that I would say is really important about integrating clinical insights. And then the next thing, of course, is the use of AI. So with NLP, we can absolutely go through the medical record and pull out appropriate sections of the medical record to pull forward those ICD codes to the highest level of specificity. So don't just pull out any ICD code, but you know what? Let's make sure that we're looking at physician's notes, discharge summaries, bringing in those lab results, things like that, and tying it back to that key diagnosis and ensuring that we are coding to the highest level of specificity. The other thing that the NLP will absolutely assist with is identifying those missed ICD codes. So as providers are going through the medical records, we all know that they're at a time crunch to get documentation done. And oftentimes they will go ahead and document the signs and symptoms, but not necessarily apply a diagnosis to that or a diagnosis that's the highest level of specificity. So again, by integrating the NLP technology, your coding education, that collaboration between the clinical staff members, that's going to get us to best practices. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just CDI, right? Clinical documentation all around, no matter who's doing it. We want to ensure that we are including things like chronic conditions, comorbidities, complications, that everything's documented and that it's completely up to date based on that particular specificity. So those are just some of my thoughts around that.
Thanks, Rita. James or Nadim, do either one of you, I mean, are these some of the best practices that you've been able to implement into your programs, James?
Yeah, I would say I really like the viewpoint that Rita put in. You know, being in the industry, I've been blessed to be in this industry for close to 20 years and have had phenomenal mentors, work for great people. You know, when I came into this industry, there was less of a spotlight on coding. And I think that we're just driving revenue. We're just trying to get as many charts through the system. You would do some deletes, but it would just be a sample. You know, when I've worked with Nadim in previous lives, I'm very proud of the work I did with Nadim. We were one of the first plans that actually did second pass coding across the board. That was laughed at 10 years ago in the industry, but that's become a standard. So I think as this continues to evolve, like Rita said, we have to be on top of what's coming. And you've seen with, you know, CMS, OIG, now we're getting into the RADV audits that you have the extrapolation. And so it requires you to have a risk mitigation program from end to end, not just take a sample of 100 charts and see, you know, are we up coding or not coding properly? So that's become another layer in the industry. There's a cost attached to it, but I think ultimately that's the right thing to do. And CMS and OIG have been very clear that's the expectation moving forward. So companies like Reveleer, you know, with artificial intelligence and some of the back end processing and everything that you've put together, enable health plans that maybe don't have the maximized processes for risk mitigation. In addition, you know, to just getting the chart and coding it, you do have the position to help people maximize those processes.
That's great. I mean, and you touched on something that I think that everybody's probably thinking about. Maybe it's keeping them up at night, and that is this new trend in audits and being and ensuring that you have a program that protects you against those audits whenever possible. I'd love to dig into that a little bit more and understand some of the strategies that you're incorporating into your programs at CareFirst to do that, and maybe what the role of this risk adjustment technology and AI is in that context of audit protection.
Sure. And I know Nadim has some thoughts. I think that what's interesting about the CMS audit process is, you know, risk adjustment can be very volatile. It's rare for someone to still be at the same company in the same role 6-7 years later, because these are high pressure jobs, the turnover, people get promoted, people move into other quality, you know, side of the house. So you're frequently getting audited on something that happened before your arrival. So I think it's important to constantly have your policies and procedures updated to make sure that you're looking into what you're doing from the future state, you know, in the discussions with the C-suite. But are you looking 4 or 5 years back? Or do you have deletes that are out there from 2019 that you need to handle, 2020? Are you really managing that? And I think that's the first, you know, brutally honest discussion you have to have internal. And then once you really decide, you start taking a look into, you know, the OIG toolkit, which is out there. There are no excuses not to leverage that. I think that's, once you started that baseline, that's where Reveleer comes in, because your intelligence, as we were saying, you know, before this discussion, if you're working with Reveleer for several years, you're able to see what members you've been targeting, and you're able to see that, hey, we're getting the same chart on James Lewis at the same foot and ankle doctor for 4 years straight. So we should be moving him into more of a prospective model and not the retro. So that's part of risk mitigation, is limiting how many charts you have to chase. I think what Reveleer does very proficiently, you understand that your business model isn't just about chasing charts. It's about providing the analytics and technology so you don't have to chase as many charts. And Reveleer understands that, which is one of the many reasons why, CareFirst is in business with Reveleer.
Well said, James. And you brought up a memory that triggered some sleepless nights, but I think it set us up for success down the road, because at the forefront of setting the leads and coding both ways, we were one of the first plans to really take pride in that, and you can see now that others are following, but now it's just common sense for us, right? One of the things that we spend a lot of time on here at Reveleer is really thinking how we can anticipate some of those business disruptions, and looking at what are those high risk HCCs that we can highlight as our coders go through their processes. How can we exemplify those to say, by the way, we're seeing this and this and this highlighted because it's constantly being part of Bradley audit? How can we make sure that our customers are better prepared whenever they have to go through an audit, or just in general have the comfort level that they know that there's no risk on their part? And then part two is, how can we, using our ACD analytics, prepare them to go after the right members? Because to James's point, you can see the population, and by looking at trends and patterns and anomalies, you can see that certain members will do a certain activity, like a doctor's visit, a certain time of the year, every year. And how can we move that to a point of care activity so that we don't do chart retrieval and retrospectively try to close those gaps? How can we move that upstream to, one, help the abrasion from provider, but also from a member's perspective? So those are a couple of things that really help us. And at this point, AI is beyond just NLP. We're looking at generative AI, agentic AI, autonomous coding, and thinking of ways that we can say, okay, well, if you've done this the last 15 times out of 15, odds are here's a prescribed way for you to think about the 16th time. Here's a way, based on what we've learned, based on teaching and monitoring our models, how can we be better so that you don't have to go through the 16th time doing the same thing? And so a lot of that is happening to just be more efficient, more effective, to drive better outcomes.
And I'll add briefly, payers that are really graduating and moving into, and I love what Rita mentioned, payers that are really evolving, they're taking the data from Reveleer and they're integrating it into their coding education. I think at CareFirst, what's really important to us is that we're providing education to our FQHCs, to our provider partnerships, so that when we see consistencies or inconsistencies, if we're managing certain HCCs well, or if we see that, hey, we're on the claim side, we're letting claims come through, but then when we pull the chart, it's inconsistent. It's not a match. It doesn't, meet CMS OIG's criteria. Are we physically going to the office and providing that training? And that's one of the things I'm very proud of CareFirst. We've built a very strong training module, and we go out and provide quarterly trainings to our FQHCs and our provider groups, and then we're able to help build internally the case as we transition to prospective, that we're getting the right HCC coding, from the beginning. Even have used some embedded coding staff in some of our larger provider groups as well.
I would say if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, is what James just said, is to really be able to work with their providers to say, hey, how are you doing? What can we help with? These are some of the metrics that we can help you understand where we're coming from. Such an important component.
Also,
I love that you
I just
mentioned
want
that,
to add
because
to
this.
that.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Rita. I was just going to toss it to you, so I'm so glad. Yes, go ahead.
That's all right. So just going back to like audit protection and things like that, I think one of the best things that we do at Reveleer is that we do have the ability, to go out there, take a look at that OIG toolkit that James was talking about, and identify those high-risk groups. So where do you see the most errors occur in coding? Your basic coding, where are we up coding? And things like acute stroke, acute heart attack, embolism, lung cancer, breast cancer, all of those are they're sitting right at the top of just having all types of coding errors. So when you utilize the NLP, we can absolutely identify those disease processes, any of the associated signs and symptoms, medication uses, any type of lab or procedure that was done to support that. And we can actually take that information and let it go through primary coding and then send that directly through to secondary coding as well prior to submission. So just another way to protect yourself in audits on the Reveleer platform. I wanted to throw that in there.
That's great. I mean, our technology really has thought of a lot of these different challenges that our customers are facing. I'd love to pivot to a pretty big topic. I think it's on a lot of people's minds, and maybe we'll even see some of the themes that we've already discussed in your responses. But this really is to everyone. And James, I'll let you start. But the question is, so how do you see the relationship between technology and clinical collaboration evolving in the next 5 years? So looking ahead, what are some of those trends that organizations need to prepare for? And maybe what are you thinking about in particular at CareFirst as we all move in that direction?
Well, definitely, it needs to be integrated into the claims. I think where people that have been through, I've been fortunate. Well, I don't know, fortunate. I've been through 3 RADV audits in my career. A lot of times where you have issues with the RADV, it's because there's an issue on the claim. There's this, misnomer. You've seen cases where it's an in-home assessment. You've seen cases where, it's retro program, but a lot of times, just like Rita mentioned, you have someone with sepsis on a claim where there is no hospitalization. So, I mean, that's not possible. So I think we're trying to get, as we restructure our claim strategy, can we get the OIG9 toolkit pumped into the front end so that those things never make it to the claim in the first place, so we don't have that risk out there? I think that companies like Reveleer, they offer the opportunity to create a system where you're able to jettison those claims those HCCs that don't make sense. So if you're using Reveleer's platform, there are a lot of payers that have their own coding team and they have an internal platform, but how can you get Reveleer's platform to sit on top of, the claim system and kind of make that merger? That's where I see with artificial intelligence, the ability to actually stratify the population. As we mentioned, everyone's on a different place on the spectrum, but if you're a company that manages the OIG9 well, but you don't manage some other things well, I think AI allows you to look down at each provider group and each member cluster, whether it's a DSNP, whether it's an EGWIT program, all of the different programs, even getting into the Medicaid side of the house. You're able to take all of that data and say that let's integrate this stuff on the front end to make sure that things that aren't supposed to get through, they never get on the claim in the first place, thus exposing yourself to less risk, and then giving you an accurate risk score from a P&L and actuarial standpoint.
Well said. In something to segue and piggyback off what James just said is also how do we minimize provider abrasion? We rely so much on providers to be effective, efficient, to be bought in, and as you like, CareFirst is very proficient at managing the relationship, engaging providers, but there's a lot of struggle on that front, and providers at times are just struggling to understand the complexities of quality, of risk-bearing arrangements that they engage with. So I think one of the things that really will go a long way is how do we seamlessly enable them to execute their activities at point of care without having them go through the burden of reading notes and faxes and spreadsheets, but actually have something that will prompt them to say, hey, by the way, Nadim is in the office. How about you check for this and check for that? How do you ensure that it's something that is part of the workflow to enable them to just be more effective at what they do without having them think, oh, wow, I have now a lot more a lot more work to do. And we take a lot of pride with our clinical intelligence to be able to provide that, enable them. So I think in addition to what James said is really that how do we become more seamless in this entire execution process?
And to add briefly, you know, one of the things that's funny about risk adjustment, because you have clinicians on one side, so you're really working with your clinicians that have a different objective than your actuary finance people. So you have to be able to sit with the medical director and have a viable conversation, even though I'm not a clinician, I'm a finance guy, but then there are a lot of people that are clinicians that run risk adjustment teams that don't have a finance background. They have to go and sit with the CFO and the P&L leaders. So it's very important, I think, what Reveleer does, and really what we're looking at from a continuum of AI. This is also used to educate your C-suite, because your C-suite is putting together your 5-7 year strategic planning. They need to understand the ramifications from an audit perspective and from a clinical perspective, how we're managing lives and how that impacts, you know, MLR, MBR. But they also need to understand the immediate actualization of the revenue targets year over year. And that's a very interesting dance, because you can hit your revenue targets in the short term, but if you don't manage that member in the long term, they're going to have serious outcomes that are going to kill you on MLR. So then you're not going to hit your revenue target on that member. So that's
spot on.
I think AI is kind of the final frontier to really get all of that data together, and then you can start your strategic planning, you know, over the next 3 to 5 years, which is critical.
Spot on. Well said.
Rita, what would you add to this? What are some of those future trends that you're seeing?
I think the one thing that I'm not seeing quite yet that we need to work on just a little bit more is getting our providers and some of our payers, not all, but some, more familiar with data analytics. Because as AI and machine learning continues to integrate into the clinical workflow, that data is going to be coming in volumes. That data is going to be coming in real time, like Nadeem was talking about. So just getting everyone up to speed and comfortable with technologies and things like that, I think that would be extremely helpful. I also think that I see the expansion of telemedicine and remote monitoring coming into play. So we're seeing telemedicine since COVID-19, right? We all do those type of visits now rather than going into the provider. But what we're also starting to see is that people are utilizing a lot of wearable devices to where the providers can simply tap into that and do their documentation right from that particular monitoring device. But that, again, goes all the way back to education. It's going to go back to data. It's going to go back to decision making and all of those types of things. And the last thing that I'll say, and James touched upon this, and I can't express this enough, is that we have to start engaging the patients more to be more aware of their own care. So patients absolutely need the ability to track their own health, communicate with their care teams, a way to access their health information in a way that's comfortable for them, right? So again, with me, it's more about as we integrate clinical insights, technology, payers, providers, beneficiaries, we must focus on education across the board.
Yeah, I think that's just spot on, Rita. Like I said, that's one of the things I'm really proud of. What we've done at CareFirst is just building that education. So we have all of this data coming in from Reveleer and these different sources and supplemental sources, but the ability to actually get into a granular fashion and go into our provider groups and FQHCs and educate them so that they can get better at what they're doing, and building that partnership is just critical to longitudinal success in risk adjustment.
Well said.
I love the answers to those questions, and what really stands out for me is the varying perspectives, and but the common theme really is there. We really need to all start working together, and being thoughtful about the variable of objectives from a care delivery standpoint to a financial impact. You can't let one fall by the wayside if you want to be successful. And AI really is in the best position to help us do this without it falling down. I think that in some ways we wouldn't be able to do it without artificial intelligence in any meaningful way. And the environment is only going to get more complex. Certainly regulations are going to continue to change. And this move to, Medicare Advantage beneficiaries all being on a value-based care program by 2030 is going to make a big impact on that. So how do we prepare, I think is the big piece. And education has to be the gold standard, right? If we don't educate users, providers, and overall organizations on what the future looks like, adoption will be really hard. So with that said, I do want to start taking some questions from the audience. We're at about 45 minutes past the hour, so we do have a few more questions. And I think we have one that's been in there for a minute, and this really is about the results of our poll from earlier when we started. So I'm gonna toss this one over to you, Nadine. This is a little more on the technical side, but specifically, how can AI help organizations, risk-bearing organizations, overcome the top challenges identified? I sort of want to zoom into the data management piece, because I think that's a common theme. Certainly, artificial intelligence is, can be really cool on the output, but it's so important that you've got the right inputs. So maybe you can expand for us on how AI can help with that, and maybe even some of the mechanisms around artificial intelligence to make sure that they realize the benefit.
Absolutely. I think that's a twofold answer. I don't think that there's a magical way to just transform using AI. And what I'm referring to is that you need to have the ability to trust the data you have. You need to be able to have strong foundational components that you can say, yes, now that I understand our claims or our demographics, I understand the timeline, I have a good pulse on our providers, I am now well versed into what needs to be done. AI is a complement and not just a specific part of AI. I think it's a complement to enable you to be more successful, be that to look at trends, patterns, anomalies in your data, to say something James referred to earlier is that, okay, we see that James goes to a doctor retrospectively and we capture it. How can we learn from that? How can we learn from that information to move care, to move this data capture much further upfront? How do we anticipate certain high-risk HCCs that are happening, such as things that just don't make sense, be that for the type of person, be that for the type of service that's being performed, because there are no business rules and guidelines upfront to be able to catch those. And unfortunately, from the time a claim comes through a clearinghouse until it gets to your risk adjustment, there are a lot of steps and hurdles that get past, a lot of business rules and adjudications and changes. So by the time that happens, a lot of integrity is sometimes lost. So using AI, you should be able to apply some of those common sense rules to give you a sense of comfort. And I would say more as an enabler, not to do some of the things that are just hard to achieve based on the environment that we live in.
And if I could add to that, I think it gets even more important when it comes to value-based care, because if you're on a risk arrangement and you're on a capitated model, which I've had a chance to, work with risk arrangements, I've been on full cap, those dollars and those discussions from the P&L finance side, value-based care is augmented and helped by solid AI platforms, because you need to make good decisions, because if you're on an 88% cap, you need to make sure that those dollars that are coming in are actualized, or you're going to have serious issues with your provider groups that you're on a cap with. So I think we talked before the meeting, Sarah, it's so important to have a roadmap together if you want to move to value-based care over the next 3 years. AI should be a major part of that roadmap, because you're going to need that data to make sure that as you're getting into, a smaller risk arrangement, then a larger risk arrangement, to upside, downside sharing into a full cap, well, AI can help both the payer and the provider group or network to really actualize and have an understanding of what risk is out there, so that they're moving together towards, a better risk sharing model. And if that risk sharing model is good for the members, meaning that, hey, I'm parsing out all of my complex diabetics to someone that wants to take cap on that, that's going to be better for my STAR program. That's going to be better, for the wellness and value and quality of life for my members. And AI is going to be a part of that model moving forward. And I'm actually looking forward to that, because that's not something we've had in value-based care in the past. We're just kind of looking at some of the data. That AI allows us to look at the panoramic data, and also allows us to look at, the book of business for Reveleer, the book of business for other payers in the state, in the region. And that's very exciting to a data nerd such as myself.
Absolutely. And how do we
Wow.
expose that data? How do we visualize this data? Sorry, Rita. How do we make sure that people have a way to actually digest that information, which is like the last step of, yes, applying AI, but then how do we prescribe that data in a way that's meaningful, impactful, actionable to executives, to your teams internally, et cetera?
And I absolutely loved what James said when he was talking about looking across, all the different businesses. So the one thing that I think AI is going to be very beneficial in is taking all of that disparate data sources and creating data repository. So having the ability to identify duplicates, anomalies, missing data, doing some standardization. So when all of these data sources come in and they go to James, and James has got to get ready for this big meeting, this presentation, he can look across all of his book of business from a data perspective, looking at a standardized format rather than 5 or 6 different formats that he's piecing together manually. So when I think about that, that's the way that I see it.
No, I think, and that's great too. I'm glad that you mentioned that, Rita. When you're leading a risk adjustment team and you're going into your QBRs with your C-suite or meetings with your C-suite, you have 5 minutes to present this data. So you don't have 30 minutes to get into the nuts and bolts of HCCs and all of the, all of the different areas. You need to have a good elevator speech. And if you're doing multiple lines of business, multiple H plans, you've got to be able to actualize those dollars and actualize all of the risk briefly. And I do think that AI is going to be critical in allowing people such as myself to make sure that we're providing the best message to the C-suite, because ultimately they're the decision makers and they're making the investments on human capital. They're making investments on other vendors. They're even making investments with Reveleer. Is there value at going after an additional 100,000 charts? Is the ROI there? And being able to summarize those data points is really, really valuable, because a lot of members from the C-suite, they're looking at the full version of the plan. I mean, there's so many different aspects of a plan. So having that data helps them to make the right decisions.
That ability to communicate effectively to the C-suite is such an art form, especially these complex topics, and to give them insights that are going to be, actionable. Like, what do we do next to help them make decisions? That I think AI, I agree, that is going to play a huge role there. We've got time for one more question. There's a really great one. This is very future of AI, but we're also seeing some companies starting to come out with more agentic AI. So the question is, given the complexity of risk adjustment and value-based care, how can agentic AI autonomously navigate clinical documentation, coding decisions, and compliance requirements while maintaining the nuanced human judgment critical in healthcare? There's lots of balancing act that has to happen there, but the future is already here. So I'll ask you guys, who wants to take this one?
I'll take a swipe at it first.
Okay, thanks, Nadeem.
So autonomous coding and agentic AI comes into place where it makes the most sense. So if you have data that is formatted, data that can be not guessed upon, we're talking EHR data, claims data that you can clearly confirm what it is and what it does. Agentic AI can be phenomenal in saying that, by the way, I'm seeing X, Y, and Z. There's no doubt in my mind that based on the models that we ran previously 1,000 times, this is happening every single time. I can with a very high confidence say this is accurate. Where it doesn't apply is really where you have to do some guesswork and rely on really the human touch. Looking at charts that are scanned, that you require a little bit decoding, a little bit help with an extra help of a human eye, some expertise. And so I think it's important to understand what the capabilities are and where they are best applied. I think just saying AI will solve our needs is just not realistic. But applying AI in the right way can be phenomenal.
I think you have to have, you got to have a roadmap. You have to be brutally honest about where you are as an organization versus where your vendors are. So we were talking in the before, you know, I referenced, I would love if my wife bought me a Bugatti for my birthday coming up, but I can't drive a stick, so I wouldn't be able to drive it. It would just be sitting in my driveway, looking beautiful. I think the roadmap is important to really understand where you are and understand how you can use the technology. There are a lot of payers that they're barely able to send a flat file out or a JSON file. I mean, they're just, the data is so, it's so distorted. You have to have standardized processes. So I would say that, you know, Jason's question, it's difficult to answer that immediately. It's going to be a different solution depending on where that payer, where that ACO is currently, and you're going to have a brutally honest roadmap. Whether you bring in a consultant to develop that roadmap or you develop it internally, or if that's something that Reveleer wants to get into. But I just think it's important to understand where the vendor is from a technology perspective, where the payers are, and then let's create a 24-month roadmap to where we're able to leverage and maximize the technology, both on the clinical end and on the financial end.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Adoption of technology like that, it takes a lot of thought and planning, and we definitely can't skip to the end. Rita, anything else to add before we close things out?
The only thing, I think it's roadmap, what James was speaking to, and also your risk tolerance, you know, from that perspective. But I also believe that will AI eliminate a human touch? And this is a coder talking, right? I don't think that it will, because I think that you do need, especially for those high risk ICD codes and things like that, that you're always going to need that coder to come in and validate what the NLP is servicing up. And that validation is around, of course, meet and or tamper. But definitely a roadmap, definitely lots and lots of planning. And then you have to look at your risk tolerance, because the OIG will always be there.
Great add on that one. Well, we just have a few minutes left, and I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists. You all have done a tremendous job helping guide this conversation. I've learned a lot today, and I just appreciate your time. So thanks so much for joining us. I'll turn it back over to Naomi to close us out, and thanks again for joining, everyone.